the only member of my family who has never seen a ghost. You're probably asking, what am I doing on this page then? Well, even though I've never had such an experience, I find the subject very fascinating. My brother, father, and uncle have all seen ghosts. First, a bit of background. I was born in 1964. My brother was born in 1966. Our parents had us rather late in life. My father was born in 1923, my mother in 1925, and we are first generation Mexican American. When my father first came over to the United States, he went from farm to farm looking for work. One night, he stopped in an old abandoned ranch house to avoid a downpour. This was in the early 1940s, and he faced quite a bit of prejudice, so he always carried a weapon and was careful about where he slept. Instead of going into the bedroom, he found a smaller storeroom in the house and slept there. In the middle of the night, something woke him up. He said that he felt he was not alone in the home. Thinking he might be in danger from drifters, he drew his knife and went to investigate. He saw a light in the kitchen, and remembering there was no electricity, thought the house might be burning. He walked in and saw a man sitting on the floor, with his legs in front of him in a V. The light seemed to be on him, but that was not coming from anywhere. The thing that scared my father the most was when he looked up at his face. The man seemed to have an impossibly wide grin, literally ear to ear. He then saw that the man was wearing a sort of cloth or cotton fabric across the bottom of his face. In the bad light, it looked like a big white grin. He seemed to remember his father telling him that sometimes dead people had such cloths put across their faces, and this one seemed to have slipped down. He knew then that this was not natural. The man was not breathing or moving. My father backed out of the kitchen and ran out of the house. Years later, now a homeowner in a small Texas town, he told us this story and one about our uncle. My uncle drove trucks in Mexico and often had to drive all night. His area of Mexico is a very mountainous place, and on one particularly dangerous road, he drove very slowly. He had driven that road in the daylight and knew that down the side of the small cliff, there were many overturned trucks that did not make the curve and were left there to rot. One night as he was nearing the curve, he heard something, a bumping noise on his driver's side window. He turned and saw a man, dark and shadowy, clinging to his truck, his dark face just a few inches from his, separated by only glass. My uncle almost lost control of the truck, and afraid for his sanity, never looked at the man again. In his peripheral vision, however, the man was still there, never moving, just holding on. As my uncle neared the curve that had killed many a man, the apparition simply jumped off. My uncle requested a change of routes the very next morning. His boss did not argue, as my uncle was simply one of the many drivers who, after having been scared on that route, requested changes too. My brother's ghost story happened just a few years back. He was driving home from visiting a girlfriend. He lived on the outskirts of town, and he had to drive past some old abandoned warehouses and grain storage bins to get home. It was dark, and he had his headlights on. He was driving along when suddenly a woman wearing white just walked out in front of his car. He hit the brakes and was about to lean on the horn when she turned back to look at him. She had no eyes. My brother closed his eyes hard for a second to clear them. He thought it was a trick of the light. When he opened them a second later, the lady was gone. He turned to the direction she had been walking in before he closed his eyes and saw that she was already 100 yards or so away, walking through an overgrown lot between some warehouses. There was no way she could have ran that far so quickly. She disappeared behind some building, and my brother drove home. By the time he got to the back door, he was shaking so bad he could not hold the keys and had to knock to be let in. He still drives that road, but never at night. The villa in Spain felt wrong from the moment I stepped into my room. The villa in Spain felt wrong from the moment I stepped into my room. It wasn't the usual tourist trap spookiness. This was a cold dread that seeped into my bones. The air hung heavy, thick with a silence that seemed to press against my eardrums. I tried to explain it to my family, but their laughter just made the unease curdle further in my guts. I've always been a sensitive, not psychic, not exactly, more like a frayed wire picking up stray signals. Visions flickered at the edges of my sight, fleeting glimpses of people who shouldn't be there. Whispers too brushed up against my mind, unintelligible murmurs that sent shivers down my spine. Here in the stifling quiet of the villa, the whispers were a constant, a low hum of unseen presences. Back in England, there was an abandoned house near my old flat. It had a malevolent aura, a weight that settled upon you like a shroud. Drawn by a morbid curiosity, I snuck inside one day. The air inside was stagnant. It was heavy with the smell of decay. As I crept through the dust-laden rooms, a flicker of movement caught my eye. A woman, ethereal and clad in tattered clothing, materialized in the corner, her face hidden in a curtain of dark hair. A sob, raw and mournful, echoed into the decaying hall. I tried to speak, but my voice died in my throat. The oppressive feeling intensified, a tangible force pushing me back. Panicked, I stumbled out, the woman in the suffocating dread, vanishing as quickly as they appeared. 9 months later, the house was demolished. A fire hazard, they said. Later, rumors surfaced about bodies found underneath the floorboards in the cellar. 2 people unalive themselves. And an unidentified figure pulled from the nearby stream. The whispers in my head, not voices, but emotions, fragments of despair and rage, intensified after that. It wasn't madness, not exactly. It was a heightened sensitivity that left me perpetually on edge, a conduit for the unseen misery that clung to places like a stain. There's no glory in this, no heroic pronouncements or pronouncements of being chosen. There's just a chilling knowledge, a constant gnawing awareness of the darkness that lingers beneath the surface of the world. And sometimes, the darkness whispers back. I've written this before, but my story was not published. But more interesting things have happened to me since then that I had to write again. I come from a very superstitious family that takes everything seriously. Since I was a child, weird unexplained things have occurred, but the most recent are freaking me out. I guess it started when we moved to our current home. I would wake up, and there at the foot of my bed was what looked like a lady in a Victorian-style dress, looking at me at times. At times it looked like she was pacing. It was very dark, and I guess it could be a shadow, but the way it was configured, I don't know. All I know is I would be scared out of my tree. Oh, I would bring my blanket over my head and force myself to sleep that way. But this is pretty tame. Soon afterwards, right after lying down, I had heard a child laugh. I was about 13 years old, and I just put it off as my neighbors having a party. So I decided to get up and close all the windows. It was summer. The funny thing is that all the windows that I went to close were already closed. I was freaked right out, so I ran right to bed and tried to forget about it. About a year afterwards, I woke up to the feeling of being watched. When my eyes adjusted, I noticed on the side of my bed it looked to be a figure of an older man and a child, and they just stood there looking at me. I know what you are thinking. Shadows, right? No. These figures were facing the window. There was no backdrop for shadows. I flipped out. I quickly jumped out of bed to flick the light switch. When I turned around, it looked like a haze slowly disappearing. Needless to say, I didn't sleep in my room for a while. This happened to my mom. She just settled into bed. When she woke up, and there was what she claimed, a white light came from the hall towards her. That's when she screamed and woke up the whole house. We rushed in and flicked on the lights. Her eyes were wide open. She didn't even react to the light, and she was pale to the point her skin was blue. Also, I awoke in my new room located in the basement now, and there was a dark figure in the corner. I prayed to God, and when I opened my eyes, it looked like it was moving across my room, and I could feel its presence, but it didn't seem like it was going to harm me. I keep feeling like it's family. Lastly, the most recent was in our computer room, formerly my old bedroom. Shortly after my 21st birthday, I was up one night. Everyone was asleep. All the lights were on. When I felt that there was a presence in the room, and I would occasionally look in the direction, but nothing was there, until I started to type and felt my hair in my head being touched, and then I heard my name being whispered softly. I finished my housework the next day in bright daylight, just to make sure. Anyway, you're probably bored out of your tree. If you would like to email me, if you have the same stuff happening, or if you want to hear more stories, you can always message me. This is a story I shall never forget. I was about 17 years old. My first child was 3 months old. I lived in a really nice apartment in Laurel, Maryland. You know, fireplace, bedrooms on different sides of the apartment, 3rd floor level. One night I was sleeping. So was my beautiful baby boy. Then suddenly, I awoke for no reason at all. I was sleeping on my side on the left-hand side of the bed. My son was in his bassinet on the right-hand side of the bed. When I opened my eyes, standing above me was what I felt to be a man. He resembled the Grim Reaper in every way. Dark clothing, a hood, and, worst of all, no face. I tried with all my might to scream, but my vocal cords were frozen with fear. So I just pulled the covers up over my head and prayed that this creature would disappear. A short time later, I looked from under the covers, and there was no one there. I ran into my father's room all the way on the other side of the apartment, yet he was sound asleep, just snoring and all. I checked the balcony door, locked. I checked all of the windows, except my dad's room, locked. We lived on the 3rd floor, and there was no sign of a break-in, though this evil person had been standing over my bed, as though it was my turn. I have read your articles about sleep paralysis. This cannot be, considering I was completely able to move around. This happened in October of '93, and there is someone who experienced the same, and posted her and fiance's experiences. It happened to her 20 years ago, yet around the same time of the year, though in a completely different state. Does the Grim Reaper go around harassing people even though it is not their time to go? It was the summer between my junior and senior year. I lived by myself in a small town called Savannah, Missouri. My parents had moved to the Peoria, Illinois area for business reasons. I did not want to move because I didn't want to start a new school my senior year. So my parents left me the house. My best friend was Catholic, and we decided to never play around with Ouija boards or any type of evil practices. But the temptation for me was too much. A group of kids that I worked with were into contacting ghosts and such. One of them even swore to be a medium. One day me and my friend went and bought a Ouija board. It was a glow-in-the-dark one by Parker Brothers. We thought it was just a joke. Later that night, me, my friend Nate, and my other friend Marissa decided to play around with the board at Nate's house. The night was fairly uneventful, but we did talk to a few spirits. We had read guidebooks, so we knew not to ask anyone or thing to prove itself. Nevertheless, it was a very thrilling night. I had never done anything like this before. I grew up in a Christian home, So I believe these kind of practices to be wrong. So the next day at work, me and Nate told our friend Joel about the experience. That's when he laughed at us. We told him that night we would prove it to him later that night. Night came. We set up the Ouija at Nate's house again. Joel didn't want to play, but he said he would watch. Me and Nate took our positions at opposite ends of the board. Joel asked us to see if the board would contact his grandmother. So we asked, and the board said it was his grandmother. Joel, not believing this, asked us to ask for her name. Neither me or Nate, knowing Joel's grandmother's name, were surprised when the board spelled it out. This got Joel's attention a little bit more. Then, Joel started asking it questions. It was answering, but only in bits and letters. It didn't seem like vowels. We had written down everything said, but we could not make any sense of it. The board said it loved Joel, and to watch after his mother. This sent Joel into tears, but this is not the worst part. The next morning, Joel came over and told us his mother and father were getting a divorce. When we reviewed the sheet with what was said, we were able to make that out of the conversation. The board also kept on referring to Joel's mother as NOZ, going from the NO to the letter Z on the board. Joel's mother had said that that was her mother's nickname for her. After what had happened with Joel, I became hooked on the board. One night at my place, I had some friends over, while most of them were downstairs watching a movie. Me, a friend named John, and Marissa decided to go play the Ouija in my little brother's old room, now converted into a guitar room. We set up with a candle and all. It was a very dark and creepy setting, just right for a ghost talk. At first, John wasn't serious, so we had problems talking, but after a while it was very easy to communicate with the other side. Finally, we got a visitor that's vibe was very strong. I asked what its name was. It replied Hoark. I then asked where it was from. It said below. Since I was young, I was told only demons talk to you on Ouija boards. So I asked, are you a demon? Its answer was not what we had expected. The pointer circled around the board twice, and then violently slid off the side of the board. Me and my friend were so startled by this. We just sat there for a minute in silence. Then I heard a sigh. It sounded like it came over my right shoulder, but I wasn't sure if I just made it up. I asked them if they had heard it. They said yes, but none of them claimed it. So all at once, we got up and ran out of the room. We all swear it came from behind us, but this would have been impossible, or we were sitting in a triangle shape. The rest of the night, the rest of the people at my house just laughed at us for running downstairs. Okay, nothing really happened at first. I will skip ahead a couple of weeks. I had just got back from visiting my parents and was falling asleep one night when I was awakened from a sound of a grandfather clock. This didn't really bother me because my parents had one. It was not until the next morning that I realized I was no longer at my parents' house and that the sound had come across the hall on my guitar room where the Ouija was played. The noise made was more than likely something striking my bass guitar and turning on the amp. Okay, that is weird. At the end of that week, my little brother and a friend from Illinois came and stayed with me for a few days. One night, we were all in the upstairs living room playing video games when I got hungry and asked my little brother to go make me a bowl of cereal. He said okay, after he was done playing his game with his friend. Not wanting to wait around till he was done playing, I went into my room and laid down on my bed. I waited for what seemed like hours waiting for the cereal, but I eventually went to sleep. I then awoke at about 2 in the morning, hearing footsteps coming from the family room upstairs. They were very slow footsteps that were very annoying. I thought that it was my little brother and his friend, just screwing around. So I went back to sleep. The next morning I got up and went downstairs and asked my little brother why he hadn't fixed any cereal. That's when he said he would've, only he was distracted by something really bizarre. I asked him what was so bizarre that he saw in the kitchen, that he couldn't even make me my cereal. He proceeded to tell me that he saw my grandma's face. Our grandma, only she had been dead for 6 years, and she was staring at him through the kitchen window. It completely startled him that he dropped the cereal in his place, made a mess, and that's why he couldn't give me his cereal. Hey everybody, it's me, Phantom of Darkness. You remember me, don't you? Well, if you do, please leave a like, comment, and share at the end of the video. Share the video on social media, as you know, that helps the world.